Most Alaskans think of their permanent fund as one big savings account. But the truth is, the permanent fund is actually two separate accounts, each governed by its own set of rules. The larger account is known as the principal, while the smaller account is known as the earnings reserve. As oil royalties come into our treasury, they're divided between the general fund and the principal of the permanent fund. Once a dollar goes into the principal, there's only one way to get it out: by a vote of the people. In the 22-year history of the fund, not 1 cent of the principal has been spent. Principal is the truly permanent part of the fund. But the principal's not just locked in a vault. It's out there working, earning more money, sometimes millions of dollars a day. The principal is invested in either bonds, stocks, or real estate. When these investments produce earnings, that income isn't just plowed back into the principal. It goes into the earnings reserve. And the earnings reserve is where the action is. Whereas it takes a majority vote of Alaskans to spend the principal, all it takes is a majority vote of the legislature to spend the earnings reserve. With all those billions available to the legislature to spend, how do you think they've done? Let's look at the record. They've spent the biggest chunk on us, paying our dividends. The legislature has also put quite a bit of money back into the principal for inflation proofing. Every year, inflation eats away at the value of the principal. Inflation proofing is taking money from the earnings reserve and putting it back into the principal to make up for that lost value. Even after paying dividends and inflation proofing, there's usually quite a bit of extra money left over in the earnings reserve. Rather than spend this surplus, the legislature has chosen to voluntarily deposit most of it back into the principal, to the tune of almost $4 billion. And less than 2% has found its way into the general fund for state spending. Today, the principal is many times larger than the earnings reserve, and it's meant to work that way. If the principal is our star, then the earnings reserve is best supporting actor. So why do we have an earnings reserve? Why not just deposit all the income right back into the principal where it couldn't be spent? Well, that sounds good until you consider the fact that our dividends are paid out of the earnings reserve. No earnings reserve, no dividends. Plus, the earnings reserve allows the legislature to inflation-proof the fund, even if the fund's investments have a bad year. And if there's money left in the reserve after dividends and inflation-proofing, the legislature decides what to do with it. This surplus is growing larger every year and may exceed $1 billion in the near future. That's why it's important for Alaskans to let their legislators know what they want done with these earnings. So that's how the permanent fund works today. As for the future, well, that's up to you.